I know that title seems quite clickbaity, and in a way, I wish it was, but unfortunately, it is true. I want to tell this story because although it was a really hard time in my life, it was also something that I took massive learnings from, so hopefully you might find it interesting as well. Don't worry, this is not going to be some really drawn out, long life story. I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. This goes back to 2018, 2019. I was working a typical 9 to 5 in the city of London in finance, working for an asset manager. Enjoyed parts of the role, but I just really wanted to get out of that corporate environment. This was more about replacing that income, being self-employed, having that freedom. So Forex trading was a way that I thought I could make something of it. So when I first started trading, I used a few demo accounts. I wanted to practice, first. Now, one of the ways you can do Forex trading is through a prop firm, so a proprietary firm that is going to give you capital to trade with. And before you can do that, you essentially have to prove yourself as a trader. So you use demo accounts, you submit results essentially for you trading over a set period. So this took me about 4 months of doing some demo accounts, proving that I could trade. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a good trader, but it was just a minimum level that they then feel comfortable with then giving you amount of capital to trade with, and then there's generally a profit split that comes with it. So I started doing this. Now the problem with FX trading, especially alongside a 9 to 5 job, is just the time that it takes. Not necessarily the time that it goes into, inputting trades, making those decisions, more just like the research around them. And then say I put a trade on in the morning and say, I'm maybe going to hold it for 4 to 6 hours, usually sort of intraday trades. I wasn't really holding these trades much longer than like 2 days. But then because you're doing your job and obviously you can't always be checking it. So I was very, very conflicted and became very emotionally attached to it because I so wanted it to work. It's really difficult to then take that emotion out of placing trades. So if, for example, if you lose a trade, it's very easy just to want to jump back into a trade, revenge trading, that kind of thing. So that was the first difficulty point. But obviously you see the side of it of how quickly you can potentially make money. So this was a little bit of an issue to start with. So then one way to get around that is to look into algorithms. So these are ways that you can have semi-automated or you can actually have fully automated algorithms that you can trade with. And the prop firm that I was working with had one of their own fully automated algorithms that traded the pound against the dollar. You might not necessarily get as much as you might get manually trading, but because it's fully automated, you then get all that time back and you can just set it to run on a VPN and you don't really have much input in it. So this seemed really appealing to me. And it started off really, really good. So I put about £5,000 into it and it was getting around 4 or 5% per month in terms of return. Great, right? You think, yeah, that's okay, this is ticking over. But obviously that's still not enough for me to give up my job and to live off that. So then becomes the issue of, okay, well, I've got a vehicle now that is getting a good percentage return, but actually I need more money to put into it. So then becomes the issue of, right, could I borrow some money, like via a loan, put that into it, had that return, and then eventually gradually, pay off the loan. Now, this is when interest rates were fairly low. Interest rates on loans were around anywhere between 3, 4, 5%, that sort of region. So simply just went onto my banking app. You have to give a reason. I think I put something like home improvements. Got a loan. It was £15,000, the first one that I did. And I was surprised about how easy it was to do. Within a few days, I had 15k deposited in my current account. I put most of it into the algorithm. I had a few extra little bits because I think when you have that amount of money suddenly come into your account, I'm like, oh, I'll pay off this credit card and I'll buy this now. So that was maybe a little bit of a mistake, but I put most of it into the algorithm. So I had a little bit more money and some borrowed money now into it. So I had, just under 20k in this algorithm. Again, earning a similar sort of percentage. Now it does change obviously on a monthly basis. It's not like you're getting a fixed rate monthly, but still, if you think about that over the course of the year, a really, really good return. And it was a little bit more like proof of concept. So I had a bit of a higher amount in there. It was still earning a good return. So again, it comes back to that point of, well, I'm still not really earning enough to live off. Yes, it's a really nice amount. I can afford to pay back the loan, the monthly installments. But what's really going to be the game changer? It's, right, okay, I need to increase this again. So again, naturally, we go back to my banking app, look to get a loan. But this time I'm like, right, let's just go a little bit bigger this time. So this time I go for a 25k loan. Again, very little checks in terms of what they wanted to know, in terms of what you wanted to do with the money. Because I had a decent job, in terms of the affordability type rules, it was fairly straightforward. So again, within a few days, I had 25k put into my bank account, and now I had 40k of loans before obviously any interest is charged on them. So again, similar sort of thing, being in London, especially when you're starting to earn a little bit extra money, you do get a little bit carried away in terms of, oh, I can afford to buy that now, because you get excited about what the future might be. And again, that was maybe a little bit of a sort of downfall on my part in that sense. So paid off the Amex card, for example, maybe, I can't remember what I bought, but I remember I didn't put the full amount into the algorithm. I think I ended up having about 32 or 33k of the loans in the algorithm, earning similar sort of percentages, and really, really good. Like, thinking back now, I'm like, how was I not happy earning that amount? I think the loans I had to pay back in terms of monthly installments on the 40k essentially plus interest was about £950 per month. But the return that I was getting on the algorithm was, I think it was sort of £1,400, £1,500 a month that I was getting. So I could easily pay back the loans plus a little bit more. But then because of the difference, like the amount in the algorithm wasn't growing that much. Now at that point, I wasn't going to then go, right, I need to take more debt out. But it just got to the point where I was like, okay, right, I can leave this running in the background, but what's really gonna change it? And we're now into 2019, and this was when a lot of the Brexit negotiations were going on. So there was a referendum back in 2016 for the UK to leave the European Union, but obviously it took a lot of years for it to agree a deal in terms of leaving. And this was going on 2018, 2019. And there was a lot of talk about potentially us having a no-deal Brexit, which essentially means that we would leave the EU without having any deal whatsoever. And this was really negative for the pound. And the algorithm was trading the pound against the dollar. And because it was really negative, it was generally all in one direction, which is really, really good from a trader's perspective, because you're then only looking for shorts essentially. It's not like you're trying to trade both ways. You can generally just pick your points that you're going to short. So what seemed really tempting to me was that, okay, the algorithm's earning a little bit, but what if I start placing my own trades as well as that on the pound against the dollar? And because it was so obvious where the pound was going, there was so much negative rhetoric in the news and the media. So I started placing shorts on the pound against the dollar. And I wouldn't really use a stop loss. I would place a short, and it might always go in your direction straight away. But because I was so confident that it was heading in that direction, even if it sort of went against you a little bit, you could see out a little bit of temporary, being in a loss, and eventually it would come back in your direction. You didn't really even need to time the market. You could essentially place a short, wait for it to come into profit. That might be within a few hours, or it could be, within a few days, maybe, sort of a week. But eventually, because the market was moving in that direction, you could earn some really, really easy money. What I then realized was that, okay, instead of using the algorithm, I'm just going to trade manually. I know it seems so stupid at this time, thinking I couldn't really make it as a manual trader before because I didn't have the time to input into it. But now I've got all this bigger account, I've got this borrowed money that I was then going to start manually trading. It seems crazy, but money really does affect you in a way that is really hard to explain, that you just get so carried away. There was 1 month in 2019 that I made 10k a month just from trading, doing that manual trading. There was even one night, I remember it was just before I go into bed, which is probably the worst time that you can trade, because obviously you can't check it while you're asleep. It's probably not good for your sleep as well. But I put a trade on maybe like 10 p.m. in the evening, and I woke up the next day and I was $1,500 up, and I was like, this is insane. Like, I've literally gone to sleep, I've made this much money in my sleep. And I was like, wow. And especially living in a place like London, so easy to spend money. You just get carried away in terms of what you can spend, and you start thinking of, oh well, I've earned 10k this month, and I can earn this in one lucky night potentially. Oh, if this carries on going. And it's so easy that the logic and any kind of sensible kind of thinking just goes out the window. And this went on for a good few months. Really, really exciting times. I was buzzing. I still was working my job. Still wasn't this, like, got to the stage where I was like, right, I'm ready to quit, because I still had the loans as well. I still had to pay this back. And then became the point where eventually no deal Brexit was averted. And as soon as that started to happen, the pound against the dollar started to reverse. It started to go back up again. But because I had that all or nothing approach, it wasn't like, oh, I just lost a little bit, because I was of the approach of, I'll place a short, say the market goes against you, say it goes sort of 50 pips. So say I put it on like 122 and it goes to 122 and a half. So that's 50 pips that I would be down essentially. I would then see that rather than, oh, I need to close my losses, I'd be like, oh, well, now I can place another short, get in there a better position, increase my average price, which would be a better position overall, wait for it to come down, and then you'd be quids in. And obviously that just kept going up and up. And I would place more shorts the higher it goes up because I just saw it as an opportunity. And I didn't think that, although they were saying it might be averted, I wasn't quite sure whether it would be. And at that point, you become committed in a way because you're like, I can close all my losses now at say like 50% and you lose 50% of your account within like a click of a button. Or you have the ability where you could come back in your favor and you could win them all. Obviously, the other side of that is that you lose it all. So you become of this decision where you're like, I either decide I'm going to lose 50% or I take the chance. And crazily, like I just kept putting these shorts on and it came to the point where the market just kept going against me. I remember one day, I think it was something like 28K I lost in one day when they all got liquidated. Essentially, you don't have any further money left to fund those losses. And I remember sitting at work and I was just like, what the hell is going on? Didn't know what to think. It was, you don't really think about the practicalities of it in there and then. You just think like, oh, is this a dream? This can't be real. Like you don't really think of the implications. You can still do your day-to-day things for the short term. Horrible. I was just like, what am I going to do now? Because you've got all these loans still to pay back. You're paying back nearly £1,000 a month. Plus, because I was then spending so much more, like I had a Amex bill, for example, because I wanted to keep money in the algorithm rather than taking money out of the account to pay off the loans, I was then sort of paying that off myself, building up some other debt on some, like interest-free, credit cards from that perspective. And that's how I essentially got to that 50K. Because it was 40K in loans, plus the interest that was on it, plus I had interest-free credit cards that I was offsetting some of my extra spending with. And it just goes to show how quickly money can change you. In that moment, I had a level of like invincibility. It was like I couldn't lose because the ease of just placing a trade a few hours later, you're that much money up. You don't really think about the consequences of like, what if this goes wrong? Like when I first started, that wasn't how I set out for it to be. Clearly I set out for just to invest some, loan into the algorithm and then see how that was going to go. I never had that intention of then manually, trading with it. It's just how it turned out. But one thing, led to the other, and then we got to that point. So my advice, if you've made it this far, is don't be afraid to hit pause and evaluate your situation. Like, don't be afraid to do like a worst case analysis. Can you afford to take that risk? Don't just think that's going to carry on forever. Even if you're doing really well in whatever it is, it can be a completely different industry. Just always take a step back, look at the situation and work out your different scenarios that can happen, right? Don't get carried away with it, however tempting that money might be, because it really will change you. Work out, okay, can I afford if this happens? Not even have to work out what are the chances, just see, can I afford for this to actually happen? And I think it just gives you a bit more of a clearer picture. I think we really underestimate the power of time and compounding. Like the return that I was getting in the first instance was amazing, right? Like if that had continued, even at a lower account size, it would have grown naturally. But because I became so impatient, you then take on more risk. You then ends up obviously going really bad and you end up in a worse position. I think that is a massive lesson of having patience and realizing what you've got, why you've got it. I was in a very, very lucky and fortunate position, a privileged position, because I was able to move back home and live with my parents. I was still able to work the same job. This then coincided with the lockdowns. So everyone was then working from home. So in a way, I was so lucky in that instance that I was able to still carry on working my job. So I still had an income. I was able to move back in with my parents. Then I didn't have any expenses. And I was then able over the next 2 or 3 years to then pay back those loans. But obviously had to make so many sacrifices and give up so much in that time. And it took me a long time in terms of paying for that mistake. But I'll say the story of how I paid it back and my strategy for getting myself back on track for another time. I just wanted to keep it there. So if you've made it this far, I appreciate you watching and hopefully you've taken something from it. If you found it interesting or even some learnings that you took from it, let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've gone through something similar or what you took from it. And yeah, I just appreciate you watching. Thanks again, and I will catch you in the next one.